Got a packed Wednesday podcast for you here, breaking down some more stats around the Harden piece. Hit us with the beats.
You better believe it, man. We have our questions, our concerns, and quandaries about one James Harden. Recently, article goes up kind of breaking down some interesting percentages. And depending on what you want to label as the issue for James Harden, this could be extremely concerning or just something to keep an eye on. We get in on those numbers, we get in on the role players, and Doug provides some just fantastically alarming stats on some of the supporting cast.
It's not all skies falling, but hey, there's some things that kind of jump out to you when you look at the early season stuff. 4 games could be a little, could be a lot, depending on how you look at it. We're going to get into it all, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Thanks for making Locked On Nets your first to listen. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where the Locked On Nets YouTube channel is rip roaring and out there. So make sure you're checking all that out. And thanks again for making Locked On Nets your first listen. I am Doug Norrie, owner operator DFSR.com. Got you covered for all the projections you'd ever think you could ever need for the NBA, for FanDuel and DraftKings. And that is Adam Armbrecht. He's covering the Brooklyn Nets for us. He's also the host of the One Giant podcast for that loser of a team with his boy Andy Mack. Buddy, how are we doing on a Wednesday? Plenty to talk about here in Nets World.
Yeah, we're going to dive into some great stuff around sample sizes from one of the superstars giveaway. It's going to be James Harden, but I'm on day 2 of the hunger strike for blue check mark. Until I receive the equal status of my co-host on this podcast, I shall not eat. I'm on a liquid diet, and it's going pretty good.
Kind of a win-win situation for you then, huh? Like that's like, I know
in a lot of ways. You know what? No one's upset that I'm on this, by the way. I'm not getting a lot of pushback around the apartment.
Everyone's like, great. How long should we hold out? I should figure out a way for me to go on a hunger strike too. Like we could just be, I'll do it with you in solidarity. And then it's like, we're all winning. So
I love it.
All right. We got a ton to talk about here today. We discussed yesterday the MVP candidacy for the early MVP candidacy for Kevin Durant. Back that up with some numbers, and there's even more came out today about win shares and all that stuff. We'll get it. We'll see where he stands after this next game, but I think we've made a pretty good case for that. And we also talked, sort of length yesterday about James Harden. It's actually a couple podcasts worth of James Harden talk around sort of like what's been happening with him early season. We talked about his struggles to get to the line, among other things that were sort of going on with him. And then Nekias Duncan, who writes for a bunch of different places and also specifically for Basketball News. He's great, by the way. If you do not follow Nekias, he is among the smartest guys out there. If you want to get smarter about basketball, make sure you are following him. I'll put his handle and the website and stuff in the show notes here. He wrote a really great piece for Basketball News that detailed. So, it was not this, because this would be tooting our own horn, but it was like almost like a companion piece to what we talked about yesterday. It's not
he recapped our podcast episode almost to perfection.
He didn't. It was not to be a companion. You have to know the other thing exists. So that was not like that. So that would be the case against it being a companion piece. But no, but it really did run sort of like a dovetail really well into what we were talking about yesterday. And when we read it, there's a lot of different things here. Because we both read it, we kind of talked about it a little bit about some of his takeaways around specifically Harden not getting to the free throw line, which is like this kind of like umbrella to say what else was happening with James Harden this year. Because him getting to the line is not just this binary thing, like he's getting to the line or not. It actually, him getting to the line actually or not can point out other things in the numbers and what you're seeing eye test wise and stuff about what's happening with him so far early in the season. And the guys does a really, really good job of sort of breaking it down.
No, it's fantastic. So like there's the secondary element, which is just kind of the shot percentages and things like that. But in terms of where he's getting those opportunities and why we will lovingly refer to as a companion piece to our podcast about, well, what's the catalyst for this? Is it the lack of Kyrie Irving being in the rotation and how that impacts his role? Is it the hamstring injury and him trying to figure out coming back from that, not being fully healthy? But the big number that jumped out at me to start was 21.2% of Harden's shot attempts have come at the rim this season. And you might drop in the hat, it means nothing unless you throw in that last year he did it at almost 29% and his career average is 30%. So right out of the gate there, talk about tying it back in. Something is different if you're almost 10% lower on the thing that is kind of the bread and butter about your game.
And that number, if you're in team, the fouls aren't getting called on him, this number actually dismisses that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like because we heard plenty of this, over the last couple of days, is that, he's not getting fouls called on him. And we saw some examples. People posted examples. There for sure are examples of him getting fouled that are not being called. But if you look at this number specifically about, where he would draw a lot of fouls, he's not going to draw more fouls in this area if he's just not going to this area. If he's not getting to the rim, right? Like, which is typically where you are fouled the most, which is in and around the rim. If you are not getting to the rim with the same frequency that you've been getting there for your whole career, then just that number alone will mean you will have a decrease in the other number, right? And so Nekias does a good job of sort of synthesizing what is going on here. So if you've been on the refs have it in for Harden, there's a contingent of Nets fans that are out there that are right now screaming from the raft. And by the way, Nash and Harden have said it themselves. They've added fuel to this fire about what's been happening with him. Again, they're not totally wrong, but he's just not from these numbers here. And there's a couple other things also from these numbers here. It's very clear that he is not going, those numbers aren't going to tick back up until he starts getting to the rim with the same frequency, because he will not get fouled with the same frequency unless he's attacking at the rim at the same that he's been doing.
Right. You can't knock down free throws unless you're at the line to have the attempts, right?
Correct.
That's just the way the numbers work. And you had said this over, a lot of people have been saying this, but in the league so far this season, the free throw attempts are down by 10% across the league. So it's a shift league wide. This isn't like a solely Harden thing, even if, as you said, Steve Nash mentioned, was kind of being the poster child for it. The secondary numbers that were mentioned in the article as well to kind of add on to it. So, okay, he's going in at the rim at a far less frequent percentage. Then you may be saying, okay, is he leaning into his outside game? Well, no, because then the mid-range areas, I just look into these numbers here, almost 32% are coming into that mid-range, which means the spot just before you be finishing your drive at the rim. You're pulling up, you're looking for those floaters. And again, relative to career numbers, last year, 23, almost 24%. And for his career, he only shoots that 13.5% of the time. So if you want to include last year, you can say, so maybe there's this little bit of a shift over the course of his career into a little more of that area of his game, but it's a big jump again from last year to this year. And then the double down of the compounding results is that, so he's not going into rim as much. He's living in the mid-range game a little bit more, and he's not hitting those shots as much.
Right.
So all this information tells, and not that every single defense is looking into 3 games of tape and saying, we know what Harden is, but it does lean into the idea of, if we wall off the defense in the paint and kind of eliminate those opportunities for James Harden, keep us in front of us, we're going to push him to a shot that he's not knocking down with a lot of confidence right now. So it's really all these elements are combining to create defenses that are pushing James Harden into an area of his game that is not what his third best asset in terms of his repertoire. And that's what he's been leaning into much more heavily than he has in the past.
Yeah, we have a graphic. If you're over on YouTube, we have the shot chart that he's put up so far this season. And for those that are listening on the podcast, it's just a sea of red. So there's 3 colors you're going to look at from an NBA shot chart. There's red, bad, yellow, okay. Just think of your stoplights, green, good. It's a little bit of green, a very little bit of yellow, and a lot of red for him, because it's all been pretty inefficient. And this floater piece, where it's actually doesn't delineate perfectly around where the floater is, but it would stand to reason, his finishing at the rim is 44% on the season, which is pretty bad. And this is
on almost 50% of his shots too. If we combine the rim numbers in that mid-range floater area, half of his shots are coming in and around the basket, and he's doing it unsuccessfully.
Exactly. So this is there's all these factors. So I just want to really caution Nets fans to say, don't do the thing that a lot of fans do, which is they instantly cry foul, no pun intended, instantly cry foul around not getting the calls, because every NBA player will make you feel like they're not getting the calls. That you can set your watch to an NBA player thinking they got fouled, right? So that is not going to, that don't let that be the eye test for you. And yeah, there's going to be fouls that are missed, But this does go in line with some other things that we've been talking about, which is correctable maybe. But if we're seeing this along an age curve decline, it combined with some injury stuff, like we might not expect it to really correct in the short term, right? Because and Nekias does a good job too of talking about, look, they had to play Miami. That's not Miami. They had to play Philadelphia and Milwaukee the first 2 games of the year, who is like some of the best defenses in the league. That's going to drive your numbers down for sure a little bit. So there are some other contextual factors here. The Nets shoot. We're going to get into some of the role players. They're not punishing guys like with enough danger around the perimeter, right? And that's going to help defenses a lot when the guys can't do certain stuff. So it's the reason we're talking about this is because like we want to take a holistic approach to what is happening with Harden and just don't get into this trap of saying they changed the foul rules and now it screwed up Harden's game, because that's a little bit of it, but it's really missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, the things to get into next are health, age, and
Yeah.
players around him. And that's this big swath that we're going to get into, and all these things. And to your point, it's never just the one thing. It's usually a couple of different elements that create these kind of circumstances. And it's going to be interesting to see kind of where, I don't know where you'll fall on it, but I have, not as concerning, but I do have an interesting thought about what may be a larger factor than we necessarily want to realize.
All right, we'll get into some of that in a second here. Talk about some of the role players. Talk about some of these lineup combinations that the Nets have been running out. That some have been okay, some have been problematic. Kind of like, again, it all factors into like this, trying to take the tone or the pulse of what's happening for the Nets season. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Sweatblock. If you're like me in the past, the old version of me, who sometimes would really worry about what they were going to wear. Maybe if you're giving a presentation, I used to be up in front of the classroom for years and years, not anymore, but I'd always worry about what shirt was going to show sweat a little bit worse than others. You stop worrying about that completely when you get into Sweat Block. The Sweat Block wipes are perfect here if you're in front of a crowd. We're just kind of worried. Maybe you're on a date. I'm not in the dating game anymore, but if I was, I'd be feeling a lot better about what I was wearing, sort of like color independent, what shows the sweat, because Sweat Block has this all cover for you. It stops excessive sweat for up to 7 days per use. Doctor created, doctor recommended. It's got a dry shirt guarantee. If it doesn't keep you dry, just go ahead and get your money back. You're not going to want your money back though, because it's just going to work for you. Not just for your armpits. Got a ton of other places on your body. I'm not going to go into every single one of them. We got to keep the non-explicit tag here, but there's plenty of places on your body that Sweatblock works with. All of you can get 20% off at sweatblock.com if you use the promo code locked on, or you can go to Amazon or CVS as well. 20% off at sweatblock.com, promo code locked on.
And of course, we want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. As Doug told you at the top, we're free and available on all those great platforms. So continue to support us. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. On the factors that are playing into where James Harden is, the injury one, the hamstring, I think is the easy one. We talked about it last episode, and I think it's legitimate. The time away from the court and being able to practice and get back into form, you're going to need that much time to figure it back out. So we say, okay, we're going to give him the first month of the season. The other element of it, though, that I think is interesting is the health piece. The age piece within that. As in, are we just assuming, and we're going to get into the role players around him and what's going on the court, but we're just kind of assuming that he'll come back from this hamstring and everything will be great. But the idea that James Harden's kind of calling card as far as a player was, dude shows up. He plays all the time. Like, he's Mr. Reliable, Mr. Consistent. Is there any element for you where you go, maybe the age factor that you're going to see a little bit? Maybe he doesn't have the burst anymore. Maybe the hamstring, the hamstring is the Trojan horse for saying, actually, I'm losing a step here in my game, in that area of my game. And now I'm going to have to figure out how to lean into the mid-range floater and how to knock down my perimeter shots with more consistency.
I'm going to hold off opinion on that, I think, for like a few more weeks, because I think I just don't want to take these first 4 games as the the thing that proves the rule, in terms of like in the example that proves the rule in this sense, because I just don't think we know enough. I think we have enough to know that like he wasn't fully healthy in the offseason, so it would stand to reason he's not fully healthy now. I think if we still continue to see this, like, I hate to say this because I don't want to like mark my calendar and say, hey, in 2 months, check back in on the hamstring. But like,
Right.
I think it's totally reasonable to give this something like 30 to 60 days and see where it is. And if we're still in the same lack of burst, not getting to the rim, things look like they're coming up a little short. The numbers are still on this weird career decline, I think then we would probably start having that real for real conversation. I think in this sense, the first 4 games are not a good time to talk about like what the ultimate health is. And you might say to yourself, oh, well, why are we talking about these other numbers after four games? I think it is reasonable to talk about these numbers in the context of what is happening now without trying to figure out why it's happening necessarily. Like it could be a health thing, it could be an age regression, it could just be he's still a little bit hurt. It's all to say, like, I don't think we should expect it to change overnight. But in terms of uh, look, people get old and you get slowed down. It's just that's a a fact of science and nature and whatever. But I don't I this is a long way to say I'm going to hold off opinion on the health for a while here because I think that that is contextually part of the issue, and I don't think it would. I wouldn't want to subscribe or prescribe all of it just to age here at this point.
No, and I tend to agree with you because it's like Kevin Durant coming back from his injury. I'm sure if Klay Thompson's going to come back this year at some point for the Golden State Warriors, like when guys come back from injuries, it's easy to then start to label. Oh well, and it's only a hamstring for Harden, by the way. But you go, oh, so this is the new Kevin Durant now. This is the new, right? You're going to say this is what this player is now after this injury, and that can be misleading, especially when you just think about conditioning and not even comically we know that James Harden maybe isn't necessarily the most, basketball centric when it comes to the offseason. He seems to enjoy his time away. We know his time at the end of Houston, whatever it is. So maybe it is just going to, maybe he does have to round himself back into form in more than one area before he's fully ready to be kind of, listen, from our eyes, evaluated on where his game is. But I think to me, age, the injury, the hierarchy goes injury at the bottom, age at the bottom, injury above that. And then the biggest one is the lack of Kyrie Irving and what the Nets are trying to figure out with this team overall. We said Kevin Durant is a foolproof playing with anybody player. James Harden is one of the best players in the league, and he's also not foolproof in the sense of his game not being impacted and not being diminished when he's trying to play a team role as opposed to end of Houston or the end of days for Russell Westbrook in OKC when it was like, I'll just do this all myself for every single possession of the game. The stats will all look good and we'll lose a bunch of games.
Yeah, like it was just not. They're getting so little from the role from everybody else in the team besides Kevin Durant right now that's going to impact how opposing defenses attack you. Also, the numbers are really really bad around a lot of these role players. And so it all factors into Harden's game. When Harden's game now is predicated on other guys being good. Like this is why he had so many assists last year, right? It's just not. It's not just this thing. He can make players better, and he does, but they're getting so little out of everybody else that if you see a little bit of a dip in his game combined with defenses not even having to pay any attention to some of these guys at all, it's going to make it consistently harder. And I'm talking guys on the perimeter and the interior, right? So like we've seen, think of all the problems we've seen this year. Joe Harris cannot hit threes. Okay. Problem number one. Now, I think defenses are still they still have to keep him pretty honest just because the track record is there. Patty Mills has been great. So it's not an issue for him. Although I think defenses are still like not going to overload to try to take Patty Mills away if James Harden's getting to the basket. Claxton and Harden's timing is all over the place. I will go through some numbers in a second. When he plays with Aldridge, like Aldridge's not going to play above the rim. So if they're rolling to the basket together, defenses don't need to worry about that at all. And it's just right on down the line. Javon Carter can't hit a shot. And then you just look at some of the numbers on these guys. Like no one has played more than 20 minutes a game.
Right.
It's like hard. The minutes breakdown right now is nuts. It's Harden. Well, it's Durant and Harden at the top. Then you get Harris, which is like 30 something minutes a game. Then you get Patty Mills. And then it's everybody else is 20 minutes or under a game. No, there's not a single guy over 20 minutes after 4 games, which means the rotations are literally all over the place. And most of them, frankly, have been pretty bad.
And by the way, some of these, it's a night off completely for some guys, a night on,
Sure.
right? So it's not even about everyone's getting their little bite of the apple every single game. We're trying something totally new on any given night. Quickly on, so it's a couple of things. Like you said, if the perimeter shots aren't falling, so Harden's found Joe Harris a number of times. He has over 8 assists on the season so far, Harden. Just over 10 last year. He's still getting a lot of assists. They should be 11 or 12 probably if guys are hitting the shots that they're capable of. And then the secondary piece, and I think probably more importantly, so that obviously allows defenses to stay at home a little bit more in the paint. Now, there's, like you said, there's certain players they're still going to have to go out and respect, but over the course of the game, you do start to adjust what your strategy is going to be. The other one to me is, though, and you saw this, that one tells you that it's probably mostly the hamstring that's been bothering Harden because he got brought out relatively early in the last game. And you saw him. It was a funny one. Nash and him were laughing at each other while Harden was arguing about, why are you taking me out? Like, I'm just starting to get it going here. Like, felt like he was finally getting a rhythm. So I think that's a big piece of it. But they're taking him out and trying to find out how to rotate them in and around because, again, you're asking Harden, well, when Claxton's on the court, you want to work him where he's rolling to the basket and you're throwing lobs. But when LaMarcus Aldridge is on the court, you can't have any of that in the game. And he's actually going to be fading back and looking for elbow jumpers. Now, is Harden capable of adjusting to that? Of course he is. But do I think that it has an impact on where his mindset is on a possession to possession basis? Of course. And then you throw in the other cast of characters around him and just saying, well, what's Bruce Brown? Now all of a sudden he plays the last couple of games. So what's Bruce Brown going to be doing for me in this one? And how do I play off of that? I haven't actually played with Javon Carter or with Patty Mills, even though Mills has been good. I don't know where the quality is in his game. And you get into guys like Blake and guys like Paul Millsap. It's just, to me, again, for what James Harden's role is as a point guard on this team, and without Kyrie Irving, another ball handling point guard, the level of fluidity that he probably has to be playing with on a game to game basis is enough to say, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if we're getting diminished returns early, because I'm not necessarily sure if I should be leaning more into my game or into everyone else's game as I'm coming up the court.
Yeah, like again, and a lot of these numbers back it up too. Not just the hard numbers, like the on-off court numbers and stuff for the Nets are really paint this picture of this team that is sort of discombobulated. And frankly, like, if it weren't for Patty Mills, they could be 0-4. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's kind of saved them, because every other lineup that they've had, I mean, well, obviously besides Durant, so that was, like, goes without saying. Durant has been the ultimate reason why they've, like, won, and then or 2-2, and after that it's like kind of Patty Mills, because after that it's like nobody.
Right.
The numbers, the net, like, maybe a little bit of Aldridge. The numbers on some of these guys is totally brutal. So the net rating, tweeted this out earlier, net rating on some of these. So this is like so think to yourself, when it comes to timing and what you're getting from role players, net rating is not going to be perfect. Perfect metric here, because it's going to factor in a lot of, like, sort of at times who's on off the court with you a little bit. The sample size are so small, like, so it's not going to go crazy. Basically, the only two guys with positive net ratings in the Nets right now are Aldridge and Mills. And then everyone else, including Durant and Harden, are negative. Now, those guys are closer to, like, 0. And that kind of makes sense. Like, they're 500, right? So when you're kind of close with your two best players, but some of these other guys have just been absolutely brutal. They're getting just nothing from a lot of these other guys. Like, I'll go through some of them here. So Claxton's a -10 net rating. Blake's a -11. Bruce Brown's a -11. He rounds up to 12. Bembry hasn't played enough minutes. Javon Carter's almost a -24. It's been this weird combination of, like, not getting it done sort of defensively and can't hit a shot. And so
that perfect combination you want for a guy coming off the bench.
Yeah, right. Like,
Not
again,
really doing
it's
it for
super,
you in any facet of the game.
it's super early, but, if you look at how some of these numbers are breaking down along the rest of the guys, you're getting, thank God, Aldridge just hitting those, like, those elbow jumpers that you talked about, because he's been pretty automatic, and we already know that Patty Mills feels like he hasn't missed since the beginning of the season. After that, you're just getting so little from everybody else. Some of it has to do because teams, like, just can overload and Harden, and then everyone makes mistakes and they get tons of turnovers. They just kind of let Durant do whatever he's going to do and just figure no one else is going to do anything to hurt you. Like, there's all these weird combinations that are factoring together here, but the numbers look terrible. Take a second. I'm gonna do a quick spot here, but think about. I told Adam I was gonna say this, but actually we didn't talk about. I wanted him to guess who it was, what the best and worst Nets 4-man lineup is. I kind of gave it away a little bit already. But what the best? I did 4-man because there's almost not enough minutes with 5, and then 3 it gets a little wonky. So best 4-man lineups together over the first 4 games of the season. And you at home can think about what you think it is. Also, first going to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. Built Bar made the very best protein bar in the market, folks. And it's easy because they just started with the flavors. Other protein bars just kind of wanted to pack all the protein in there. Didn't worry about what it tasted like. Just wanted to just show you that it had protein in it, and figured you could just power it down on your own. Not Built Bar coconut, cherry barcia for you deadheads, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, just some of the examples of the flavors that Built Bar has for you. They covered them completely in chocolate too. These things are absolutely delicious. They're totally good for you. They're just the perfect complement if you're kind of grabbing a snack on the go, want to just stay healthy. Built Bar has it for you. calories in that 130 to 180 range, 17 to 18 grams of protein, just 4 to 5 grams of sugar, only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. That's the metrics you like to hear. Go to built.com, use the promo code locked on for 15% off your order. Use the promo code locked on for 15% off at built.com.
So
All
I'm
right,
all over the map here.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Yes, go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no.
I'll lead you in here. Like, 4-man lineup. What do you think the best? I mean, it's going to include Durant, so you can just take him off, right? What do you think? How do you
That's
think the
3-man
rest of this
lineup.
shakes out in terms of like what the Nets have gotten positive? Because like it's been very little in terms of 4-man lineups that they can that have played reasonable minutes. By the way, it's like doesn't.
Right.
I don't know what they did there. They like Cam Thomas's 2 minutes don't count.
Can I
Here. Like,
include
I'm not
Day'Ron
talking.
Sharp, or how does that?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say him too. Like those guys, the fight, the garbage time stuff doesn't count for them. Like real minutes here. What do you think they're getting in terms of net rating? It's very few combinations that are positive here.
Well, I mean, if I'm positive, Durant, Aldridge, Mills, and I don't know if he's been on the court with them in this group, but I would say Blake Griffin.
You were close. You should have just Harden's on there, and it's these closing lineups. So it's the best 4-man group they have so far is Kevin Durant, James Harden, Patty Mills, LaMarcus Aldridge. Now,
Right.
it's you'd say to yourself, well, where are they getting defense? They haven't really needed it because the other two guys have made all their shots or made so many shots that they're getting. That's like a plus 41 net rating, and then you just the other one was Harden, Mills, Harris, and Claxton. That's only 17 total minutes. The worst one though.
Well, that's interesting though. That second positive one is interesting, given what Claxton, what his net rating has been versus the combination of best lineup. And this, by the way, before you get into the worst lineups, this is what's interesting about it, because even some guys that have been bad, Claxton's been all out of whack. He hasn't been helping Harden, even though Harris hasn't been knocking down his shots. Now you can say, so some of our bad ball is representing our best lineups, but it means that, like, or to me at least, it's saying there's good inside of it. It's just about finishing off some of the execution around it.
Well, and also if you got lucky enough to play with Patty Mills, like if you got lucky enough to be on the court,
did you happen to be standing on the court when he was raining fire from the perimeter?
Exactly, when he couldn't miss. If you were lucky enough to stand on the court, this is why it's like a little silly to do this, but I think it's instructive in some ways, because some of this will eye test, some of this will pass the eye test, especially when we get to some of the bad stuff, right? But like, if you got lucky enough to play with Patty Mills, then you probably your net rating in certain combinations is going to look better than others because he's in something around the long lines of 5 of the top 6 groups or something like that. The worst group though that's actually played meaningful minutes so far together is it is Harden. Excuse me, I just clicked off. And give me 1 second. Don't even stop it. I'll leave this in for punishment. Is Harden is in this group? It's the Harden, Harris, Nick Claxton, and Blake Griffin group. They're not 20 minutes. They're a minus 49 net rating. And then you can include Durant because the next group down has Durant instead of Harden, which basically means this is the group that played together, right? So like they just swapped out when you look at the query, it just swapped out Harden for Durant because it's the exact same minus 49.2. That group that they decided to start kind of out of nowhere, right? It was like, oh, Claxton's starting now with Blake. Okay, we've never done this before. Let's see how this works.
And here's the reason.
Here's the quick sample. It didn't work.
Yeah.
Right. It might work in the future. It might work sometime down the road. It might work. For the 20 minutes that they've done this together, it has not worked at all. And that does pass the eye test. Like that one,
100%.
when you look at that, when you watch that lineup play together, Harris can't make threes. The Claxton and Harden can't get on the same page together. Blake in that scheme doesn't give you anything. He gives you like that long extended pump fake around the 3-point line that he never shoots. And then, right. And then,
anything could happen. Anything could happen out here, guys.
Right. And that lineup has just been absolutely terrible. So there's other examples of bad. There's more examples of bad than good, but that lineup has, by eye test and by just data so far, has shown to not be positive. You knock down a few more threes, maybe it changes, but so far it hasn't worked.
So it'll be interesting too, because one thing in the background, I wondered, I don't know how big the sample size is, but LMA, Claxton, Harden, and Durant, they've been on the floor together for some amount of minutes. I'll put Doug's skill set to the test if he can find those numbers. While I say the sample size with Claxton and Griffin, like it felt like, oh yeah, that's not going to work out so good because and really this is about Claxton. You know what he can't do for you offensively, the way that he doesn't open up areas of the game or of the court for other players and other shooters. So it seems like that would be a bit of a misnomer. The other guy that we haven't touched on here yet, and I think one of the criticisms right now is like Steve Nash. What is he doing with some of these different things? You're just trying to see. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean when he started that lineup, that 4-man that you mentioned, you go, wow, this has a really low percentage chance of being a successful lineup. You think Steve Nash didn't know that? Like, yeah, of course he did. But let me just see what some of these combinations look like. When you're a good team on paper, you know that you have games to play with here to see what might work. The other guy that I think you throw into this mix, though, too early in this season in terms of negative returns or not really positive sample sizes has to be Paul Millsap, mostly because the fact that you never say his name for the most part. Like, we've
Yeah.
mentioned him before a couple of times. It just, some guys like right now, you're going to give LaMarcus Aldridge extra rest on back-to-backs, et cetera. You're going to manage his minutes a little bit. I've seen Matt Brooks talk about this, and I want to pick his brain more about the positives that he's seen in the impact that Millsap can have. Because right now, for my eye test, guy seems like a bit of a non-factor, seems like a half a step slow, and doesn't. And I'll tell you, the first spot that he's not making the impact that I thought he would, it's on the defensive end. Because I thought you were getting like this second Blake Griffin kind of player, a little more physical, work him on the switches, and you're just not seeing that to me in these first 4 games of the season.
Yeah, so he's a weird one because I don't even want to comment because he doesn't play it enough. Like,
Yeah,
like,
and that's fair too. Yeah, like it's where is the sample size?
that's the more concerning thing. It's that it hasn't looked. He's actually got a positive net rating, but again, I don't even know what to take from that because
Yeah,
his
on
minutes,
10 minutes. Yeah.
exactly, he's playing so few minutes that it's weird that it's almost like the minutes are the most alarming thing for me with him, right? It's that
Yeah.
it's not so much that it's like an incomplete more than it is anything. It's an NA, not because I just don't. I'm more wondering, was this the plan to just play him 10 minutes in the sort of deep bench, odd, one rotation in the first half kind of thing, and that's kind of it? Because if that's the plan and they're just kind of saving him, or they just see him in practice and it's like, oh, it's just not there anymore, or we're seeing, you know what I mean? I just don't really
Yeah.
know exactly what's going on with him. I'm very shocked that they were seeing so few minutes from him.
I'll give the one little caveat that he had missed the game early in the season I believe it was labeled as the COVID safety protocols. And if there was any instance that, even if it was just like what happened with Claxton, he was under the weather or something, and the NBA teams are taking advantage of this extra kind of flexibility around how you label a player missing a game. If that has any part of it, then you can think about, even if he was just sick and he's fatigued and whatever, and you're trying to ramp him back up. But when you're playing only a minute and a half more per game than Bembry is, something doesn't line up here, because that was not the intention coming into the season. So again, first 4 games of the season, but we'll probably say it's about a lot of things we wonder about. Give me 15, 20 games, and then I'll have a concrete thought about it. And if I don't see Millsap's minutes building a little bit, and also see him with an impact, though I know the minutes are small, but it almost feels like the minutes are small because when he's out there, you're just not getting a lot from him. I know it's a positive rating, but if you're just not seeing an impact, it's all relative to how many minutes you're going to play. Unlike we saw all of a sudden in the right matchup, Aldrich just goes off, or Patty Mills coming off the bench. You're seeing where the guy's values are across the board. But Millsap's just an interesting one. And we labeled him as being a really nice addition in the offseason. Give it time, but at least right now it's a little bit of a okay. Maybe you're just the guy that's on the bench behind Blake Griffin and maybe even behind Nick Claxton at this point in terms of the 4-5 kind of role, and who's going to carve out some minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Like I want to get it up to 14 to 15 minutes a game, or get 100 minutes under his belt, I guess. And I think I can start doing something more with it. It's just been, like I said, it's been a total incomplete on him. So, hey, look, they play Miami here on Wednesday. Another very tough matchup. This has been a pretty tough beginning of the season in terms of schedule for the Nets too. They did the scheduling, gods did them no favors in terms of how many quality teams they had to play right out of the gate, which is fine. The stuff always evens out over the course of a season, but Miami's going to be another tough matchup. We're going to come to you right after the game on Wednesday, break down whatever happens. Hopefully the Nets win. Maybe we talk about some new rotations, could be some things we haven't seen before, because that's been kind of a theme. And again, against a very different team in Miami that's going to play differently sort of than the other 2 teams, or excuse me, the other 4 teams that we've seen so far. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over to the YouTube channel. That link will be in the show notes. Love the conversation where people are jumping in with comments over on YouTube. The numbers continue to climb. We wanted to get up to 1,000. That's our goal. Love to hit that by the new year. Plenty of time to do it, but we need you to go over and subscribe to YouTube. The link for our Locked On Nets YouTube will be in the show notes.
And of course, it's just about merging all these different talents, the players, the skill sets. And in a lot of ways, it makes me think of, we become not a melting pot, but a beautiful mosaic. Different people, different beliefs, different yearnings, different hopes, and different dreams. That's the Brooklyn Nets, my friends. And that's straight from James Carter.
Not RIP, still alive. Yeah, there we go.
Oh,
Building
he's
houses.
building houses right now.
I was going to say,
a house just went up.
Swinging a hammer as we speak. All right, we'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.